Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 25. This is fine. All right, that didn't just happen. Pull yourself together, Ivy. Right, we're not going to talk about that, they proclaimed cheerfully as they got back to their feet and brushed off their pants. Kami, that definitely did just happen, but they could cry about it later to DJ. Right now, they were Ivy, and Ivy was stronger than that. Eraser was looking at them with concern. He looked more than concerned. He looked unsettled, or even scared. But only for a moment. That was strange. What the heck did he have to be scared of? Ivy clearly wasn't a threatening opponent when cornered, just like he had said. Oh, shit, he was talking again. Ivy managed to catch most of the analysis that he provided, and they were thoroughly confused. He was praising their strategy. That was crap strategy. Sure, it could have worked if they were coming at him with a knife rather than unarmed, but they wouldn't do that in any non-dire situation. They'd yet to use their knife as anything other than a threat. Well, that wasn't true, but they'd yet to use their knife to stab anyone, only shallow slashes, and after having been stabbed, they were even more hesitant. The whole process is extremely unpleasant, and if they didn't know exactly what they were doing, they could end up hitting a vein or artery and actually killing someone, which they weren't too keen on. The knife they'd lifted off that mugger was large, not as comically large as the kitchen knife they had before, but a wound from that knife would leave someone in bad shape. It was a hunting knife with a serrated edge. It was designed to do a lot of damage. Throwing knives, however, tended to be much smaller. It's not like they couldn't kill someone, but it seemed less likely to fatally wound someone on accident. Plus, throwing knives were generally a plural, so they could just chuck it into someone and leave it since they'd have backups. They'd still be armed, and their opponent would be less likely to bleed out if they could leave the weapon in place until they could receive medical attention. Did Eraser already think of all this? He was right. Throwing knives would suit them well. They were very excited to both move on from what had just happened and potentially learn a new skill. But Eraser was looking at them expectantly. Do you agree? He prompted. Oh, yeah, they should probably respond. Yeah, I need to grow more stronger. Now, how about throwing knives? They asked again, letting their excitement show as they bounced on their feet. Eraser looked back at them with an exasperated expression. Yeah, all right. Not that I think you're stupid enough to go out and accidentally throw one of these through someone's eye, but I'm not going to let you take these on patrol until I'm confident you know how to use them, he said before pulling out a set of knives in a sleek leather carrying case and handing them to Ivy. They took a moment to study them. They were essentially just a sheet of metal cut into the shape of a knife. The edges were fairly blunt, but the tip came to a wicked point, and if thrown properly, they'd puncture just the same as a razor. At first glance, they looked black, but when they caught the light, Ivy noticed that they were actually a dark, matte forest green color. Did Eraserhead buy them a personalized set of throwing knives? No, the color must just be a coincidence. Definitely just a happy coincidence. Awkwardly clearing their throat, they asked, Am I permitted to purposely throw them through someone's eye then? Hoping desperately to clear the tension they'd created for themselves. I'm not justifying that with a proper response, he replied as he pulled out even more throwing knives. These ones, however, looked more worn, and they were definitely just black. Did Eraserhead buy him a personalized and matching set of throwing knives? Ivy quickly shook the thought from their mind as Eraser lined himself up with the target. Right. So there are two different ways to throw a knife, with and without rotation. With either method, you'll use the same foot stance. It's your standard fighting stance. Feet offset, and like you'd throw a baseball, you lead with the opposite foot from your throwing hand. He slowly demonstrated the motion without throwing the knife. If you're throwing with rotation, then you need to be able to both judge distance and calculate how many rotations the knife will need to complete before meeting your target. This type of throwing is generally used in competition, not in fighting, but it's still a viable method if you can get the technique down. I throw without rotation, so I don't have to bother with that. I could teach you the theory behind throwing with rotation, but I don't have the practice to do it well, so I'm going to show you without rotation today. So far, this lined up with the research they'd done earlier. When throwing without rotation, you're essentially using the knife as a dart. Hold it like this, with your index finger straightened as the guide. Again, he slowly went through the motion without actually throwing the knife. You release the blade as you point to your target. Ideally, the blade follows your direction, like so. This time he lined himself up with the board and slung the knife, hitting the target dead center and embedding in the wall behind it. Holy shit, that was so cool. I'm not going to pretend to be a knife throwing master. That's all I've got. But you could also throw underhand, like this, he said, repeating the same motion, mirrored, but this time the knife just dented the outer ring on the cardboard and clattered to the ground. He just looked at it with a dissatisfied face and went to retrieve the knives he'd thrown. That's all he's got? He just hit a bullseye from like 12 meters on his first try, and he's crinkling his nose up because he can't throw underhand into a brick wall like a dang anime ninja? All right, well, that quickly just became their new goal in life. When he looked back to Ivy after retrieving his knives, the feral gleam in their eye had increased tenfold. He had to resist the urge to lunge out of the way of the target because they looked so eager to try their hand. Once he'd returned to his starting point, he looked at Ivy and nodded his head toward the target. There's not much left to it but practice. Just don't throw it even vaguely in the direction of another person until you know what you're doing. Give it a try. Ivy's eyes crinkled up like they were smiling as they lined themselves up to the target like he'd just done moments ago. They shifted their feet into place, squared their shoulders, curved their arm in a mock throw a few times, and then finally released the knife. It hit on the outer edge of the cardboard, completely outside the target, and clattered to the ground. Honestly, it was better than he'd expected. He was just glad they didn't miss the wall entirely and send the knife hurtling over the side of the building. They took the missed shot in stride and kept trying until they'd run out of knives, at which point they went and collected their blades and tried again. And again. And again. And again. This kid was so determined that it was exhausting. They'd been at it for an hour and a half, and the sun was starting to set. He'd been watching and correcting their stance every now and then, but for the most part, they had the form down well. They just needed to practice, and he had a feeling that wasn't going to be a problem for them. He felt like Majima pulling the especially devout support students away from their workstations, kicking and screaming when he told them they needed to call it quits for the night. Why the hell couldn't his students ever be this dedicated? Ugh, fine, but I'm keeping these. I need to practice, they said petulantly. Yeah, kid, they're yours. But if I see them on patrol, I'm taking them back, he responded. They looked like they had stars in their eyes as they tucked the blades into their accompanying case and stuck it in their pocket. Ivy was loath to admit it, but patrolling with someone else was so much easier and more fun than doing it alone. They were never as concerned for their own well being as they probably should be, but being able to rely on someone else to have your back was so nice. It had been so long since they could rely on anyone for anything. The thought left him with a warm feeling, the same kind he had when DJ settled down in front of the heater and, oh, that was dangerous. He could admit that he trusted Eraser with his life, with no problem, but admit that he trusted him, full stop? That was another thing. No, he didn't trust Eraser with anything but his life. He couldn't go getting attached to someone he didn't even trust with his name. Kami, he was pathetic. Getting attached to anyone who showed him the slightest bit of kindness. DJ and the Shinsos were already pushing it, and if he lost one more dang thing in his life, he was going to go off the deep end. No, this was all going to end poorly, and he couldn't do a damn thing about it. Not when he kept reaching out a hand to no one and everyone he met. Maybe he was a masochist, but he couldn't stop himself. They ended their night perched back on the rooftop, watching the stars start to wash out with the light of day. Saturdays were always exhausting, but they usually faced it with half a day's worth of sleep. But they'd been out since 10, and they were just about dead on their feet. You look like you're about to drop dead, Ivy. Eraser quipped, breaking them from their thoughts. You always say the nicest things, Eraser. They answered, sarcasm dripping from their tone. You gonna make it home tonight, all right, kid? He asked. Kami. He can't just keep acting like he cares for them, or they're gonna start believing it. Quit calling me kid. I'll be fine, they said, blinking longer than was strictly necessary. Whatever, kid, he replied. He looked at them for a moment before adding, what happened earlier has happened to you before on patrol, hasn't it? How the hell did he know that? You know how dangerous that can be. I know you do. He paused again as if unsure he should continue. I don't want you patrolling without me until I know that won't happen. He kept his eyes on them, no doubt waiting for a reaction, a denial, or the general snark they usually doled out, prompted or not. But they were tired, and they didn't have the energy to lie and pretend they still wanted to kick him out of town. Whatever you say, Dad, they replied with an exhausted facsimile of their usual attitude. They rubbed their eyes and let out an irritated humph when their hands came away covered in black eyeshadow. How the hell was he supposed to get this off? He hadn't had the chance to refill the rainwater pot since DJ crash landed into the mud. You want me to text you and Papa Tsuka that I got home all safe and sound? They asked as they swung their legs over the ledge, getting ready to drop down to the fire escape below. Eraser just rolled his eyes and said, just take the streets home. You're liable to fall asleep mid-jump. You shouldn't push yourself so hard. Whatever, they replied with an eye roll. They dropped down onto the fire escape, ending the conversation swiftly. They actually took the stairs down, rather than jumping to the neighboring windowsill and back until they made their way down, like they normally did. He wasn't wrong. They were liable to fall asleep mid-jump. When they touched their feet down on solid ground, they looked back up to see Eraser still watching them, as if to make sure they made it down all right. They weren't about to walk in the actual direction of home and give Eraser a compass pointing to their warehouse. So they held up a hand using the one bit of sign language they knew he'd understand. They snorted when he returned the rude gesture and disappeared from view. They took a wrong turn, just to be safe. The next morning, Izuku woke up with an unread text from last night. Eraserhead. No patrol tomorrow. We both need the rest. Ivy. Speak for yourself, old man. Can't keep up with the young whippersnappers nowadays? They sent back as they rolled out of their nest and realized they'd have to both brush their teeth and figure out how to remove the stupid eyeshadow with the remains of their water bottle, since the rain bucket was still empty. Damn cat. Eraserhead responded while he was finally starting to wipe his eyes and come away with a clean towel. Eraserhead. Ivy. I'm serious. Do you remember what I said last night, or were you already asleep? Okay, that was totally not fair. They agreed to not patrol alone, not to not patrol at all. He hadn't missed a patrol in the last 6 months, barring the time he got stabbed. He couldn't just leave Uptown to their own devices just because he was a little sleepy. Ivy. Yeah, but I don't remember slacking off being a part of that agreement. Eraserhead. It's not slacking off. It's taking a break. You're more likely to make mistakes and get hurt if you're tired, and then you'd need to take an even longer break to recover, or an infinite break because you got yourself killed. Stop arguing and rest. Ivy. YouTube link below. With hesitation, Shota tapped the link Ivy had sent them, and the audio started blasting out of the tinny speakers on his phone at the lunch table, grabbing Zashi's attention. What the actual hell was that supposed to mean? Zashi looked up from their food and raised an eyebrow at him as he stared at his phone in confusion. When he looked up, he gave in to their silent request and handed the phone over. After he scanned the text for a moment, the audio played again, and Zashi burst out laughing. You're not my dad! You also hear something! Ugly ass what? You're not my dad! You also hear something! Ugly ass I see what you mean about them being a little shit show, they said once they'd gotten their laughter under control. He just looked at them with tired confusion. They're saying you can't tell them what to do since you're not their dad, you geezer, he elaborated. Ugh. He dramatically grunted as he buried his face in his hands. There's not enough coffee in the world, he muttered to himself before responding. Eraserhead. If I get a call from Tsukashi saying you're out tonight, I'm going to kick your ass. How'd last night go then? Sounds like you had some sort of talk with them, Hizashi prompted. He took a deep breath and let out a sigh before responding. Yeah, we had a talk. Kinda. But that's not what I'm worried about. He paused, and Zashi looked up from their food again to show they were listening, so he continued. Well, you know how I said they told me they'd always been a target? Zashi nodded, but he didn't really know how to go from there. What happened, Sho? They asked after a moment of silence. I don't know, Zashi. They're not well. I can say that for certain. I had them spar with me so they could work on fighting without relying on the element of surprise, and they froze up before we even started. I know I should have left it, but I knew they wouldn't want me coddling them, so I told them it was just a spar, and I wasn't going to hurt them. They did pretty well until I pinned them in the second round. They panicked after I let them go. It's like they didn't recognize me at all. They were clearly having some sort of flashback. They calmed themselves down with some breathing exercise and then stood up, brushing themselves off, and acted like nothing happened. Zashi was looking at him, and their face looked just as concerned as he felt. They went from struggling to control their breathing to completely normal in a split second. I've never seen anything like it. Honestly, it was a bit off putting, but they said something while they were trying to calm down. They were muttering to themselves, and they said something about not bleeding out in an alley this time. So clearly, this has happened before on patrol, and it hasn't ended well. Not ending well was an understatement. They both knew it was pure chance Ivy even lived through that. I told them I didn't want them to patrol without me because of that, and they agreed. And, well, you saw the rest, he said, gesturing to his phone. I don't know what to do. I have no idea how old they are, and I'm pretty sure they're homeless. The only way I can reliably make sure they are safe is if I arrest them, which I have a feeling would end poorly for everyone involved, Shota lamented. So, I don't think there's much more you can do. Maybe bring them food once you've gained some more trust, but you're already there making sure they're safe. I agree that arresting them would end poorly. They're hardly be safer if they ended up in a prison surrounded by people they put in there, and it definitely wouldn't help their mental state. Zashi soothed. Just give them time. I know you're worried about it, but it's only been a week since you even started on this case. And look how much trust you've gained already, he added before returning his attention back to their lunch. Just give them time? This kid was going to be the death of him. End of recording.